think we're live. We're just going to wait for a few seconds and start. Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to all those who are watching us on this live stream video on Facebook. This is an academic webinar hosted by the Sudan Doctors Union um, UK branch, and it's part of our celebrations of the second anniversary of the glorious Sudanese Revolution, which began and started around the same time a couple of years ago in December 2018. Today, we're going to focus on a specific aspect of the revolution, a matter which is quite relevant to the medical community, and that is the evaluation and assessment of the emergency medical response during the revolution. We're going to talk about the brilliance and the dedication of our colleagues in Sudan who, despite all the challenging situations, put a lot of effort to ensure that adequate and appropriate care was delivered to injured protesters. Those who covered the field clinics at the Khartoum sit-in and other sit-ins outside the capital. We have a paper on the estimation of casualties and death during the demonstration phase of the revolution. And we're also going to discuss the role of the Sudanese medical diaspora unions in supporting the revolution as a whole, and more specifically, the medical rescue teams on the ground. We have an important and interesting project that we introduced here in the SDU UK, aiming to care for those who suffered from brain and spinal cord injuries, with the view of introducing and establishing the first national rehabilitation center dedicated for these kind of injuries. Last but not least, we are very honored and privileged to have a contribution from our colleagues in Sudan, who are going to tell us about the frontline experience and present some of the data that was collected and published on a regular basis at the time. My name is Ahmed Hashim. I'm at the time of scheduling and planning this webinar, I was the academic secretary for the union, but I'm currently the media and communications officer. And together with my colleague, Sarah Richard, who has been recently elected as the academic secretary, we will be chairing and running this webinar. This webinar is being broadcasted through Zoom, but unfortunately today we do not have a Zoom webinar setup. So all interactions will have to take place on the Facebook page. So if you've got any questions, please leave them in the comment section. We will pick them up and pass them on to the speakers as we go on. On this note, allow me to welcome the speakers that we have with us today, the panel of elite speakers who kindly accepted our invitation to participate and speak and present to us in this webinar. Dr. Sarah Abdel Jalil, Dr. Maysoon Dahab, Dr. Ahmed Al-Tahir, Dr. Wael Ahmed, and Dr. Hussam Al-Amin. We're very grateful for your presence today. Before we start the presentations, allow me to take the opportunity to pay tribute to the brave men and women and children who lost their lives during the revolution and the brutal and violent Sit-in evacuation massacre, those who sacrificed their lives to defend the principles of the revolution, peace, freedom, and justice. And more specifically, our colleagues, the Sudanese doctors whom we lost during the protest, Dr. Babikr Abdel Hamid, who was shot dead during while treating injured protesters in the neighborhood of Buri, and also Mahjoub Al-Taj as well. May Allah bless the souls of all of our martyrs with mercy and forgiveness. We should all honor their sacrifice and work together and work hard towards the realization of the goals of this revolution, and to achieve a true and robust democratic transition in the country. Sudanese doctors have always been at the core of social and political transformation in the country since its independence in 1956. And the December 2018 was not the first time that Sudanese doctors take an active role for this cause. They have made enormous contributions in almost all the major socio-political events that took place prior to that, including in 1964, the October Revolution, and also in the April Uprising in 1985. And subsequent to that, we all know that Sudanese doctors were among the first professional groups to resist the despicable and the shameful coup that took place in 1989 and led to a 30 year of miserable and devastating dictatorship. I am the SDU UK, since its inception in the mid 70s, has always stood by the people of Sudan and supported democratic transition. And we are very proud of this legacy. We very much adhere to our democratic, transparency, and diversity values. And we remain committed to the development of health services in Sudan. And we offer our full assistance to our colleagues back home in order to improve the education and training of doctors over there. Allow me now to introduce the first speaker. So our first speaker today is Dr. Sarah Abdul Jalil. Sarah is a consultant pediatrician in Norwich. She has a brilliant and outstanding both undergraduate and academic and postgraduate academic profile. But what is relevant to us today is Sarah was our boss in the SDU UK. She was the ex-SDU UK president from 2017 up until last month. In fact, she presided the union during the difficult and challenging times of the revolution. And without any doubt, she did a great and an outstanding job. She also acted as the spokesperson for the Sudanese Professionals Association, SPA, Tajamma al-Mihaniyin. And in that role, she demonstrated the leading role of Sudanese medical diaspora in the revolution. But more importantly, she was an iconic figure representing the true leadership and active participation of women in the revolution. He's going to talk to us today about the Sudanese medical diaspora unions, how they supported the revolution, and how the efforts were coordinated between the various groups to deliver assistance to the medical rescue teams locally, and also to collect and efficiently deliver donations to treat injured possessors. Sarah, welcome, and the floor is yours. I'm going to help you with sharing the slides.
Thank you very much, Ahmed Assir and Sarah Richard and the Sudan Doctors Union UK branch for the invitation and this opportunity to zoom out and reflect on what happened in the last 2 or 3 years in the second anniversary of the Sudan Revolution, and pay tribute to those who sacrificed their lives for us to live in a democratic state. Obviously, as a witness of a historical revolution, I never thought, being the president of the Sudan Doctor Union, that we will be the EC that will be working through the revolution and being part of the revolution. So I'm grateful for the Sudan Doctors Union UK for this opportunity. But in the second slide, I would like to explore with you all that as a medical diaspora, when we were raising concerns about the violation against the peaceful protesters, despite the non-violent movement in Sudan, that was not straightforward. For us, we could say we believe that that was human rights violation, but for the international community to get collective support, that has took a while. And the reason for that, they have been comparing what's been happening in Sudan and worried about what has happened following the Arab Spring and other countries with internal conflicts. And they thought that the violence was between two armies, rather than understanding that the violence was directed from the previous regime towards the public who were practicing their rights. So this first step on itself was not an easy task. And because we worked together in the diaspora and we had one vision and one view, we managed to get the international community aware of what's been happening in Sudan. I would like to say in the next slide that history matters, and we have to remember that the fight towards democratic change has been ongoing for 30 years. In the early 90s, for us as doctors, we are all aware of the doctor strike and the assassination of Dr. Ali Fadl by severe torture, and the subjection of Dr. Mamoun Mohamed Hussein to death to death by hanging. He was saved, but the psychological trauma actually that people have witnessed while they were fighting for his release is something that I cannot forget. I was a secondary school student, and I remember the face of my parents and my relatives who knew Dr. Mamoun and Dr. Ali Fadl. And this continued all along in the 2000s and 2003, to even get worse by mass and genocide and war and conflicts, where we had hundreds and thousands of lives lost. But I'm sure that you will agree with me that in 2013, the Sudan uprising was a turning point. And the death of hundreds on, over a few days who were peacefully protesting, we learned by the difficult way how to progress after that between 2013 and 2018. And one of the main, I think, lessons that we learned is how to be or to work together and to be secure and to avoid any infiltrates from the national intelligence services and how to use the social media. So if I go to the next slide, where I will talk about the invisible heroes. In this revolution, I think there are a lot of invisible heroes who have been working together inside Sudan and outside Sudan. I'm sure that some of them, even they don't want me to mention their names today, but they, those invisible heroes were part of the rescue boxes that have been arranged, giving the medication, arranging the boxes, keeping them, distributing them, using their cars as ambulances to save those who were injured, reporting to human rights organization, getting in link with influential politicians all over the world. And acting invisibly has made a huge difference. So as well myself, when I remember talking to some senior leaders all over the world who are politicians, and I start by saying, I'm not a politician, I'm a doctor. And the reason we are in touch with you is to explain about what's been happening in Sudan. This in itself, and this work in itself, was very important for the revolution to gain recognition. In the next slide, I would like as well to talk about an important concept of standing together and working together as medical diaspora all over the world in different continents, and that having the same vision, being focused, trusting each other, respecting each other, that made that the message that was distributed was the same. And that we gained credibility because we were moving together and we were providing the same information. We were rechecking among ourselves about the data, about the information, and therefore there was a lot of verification that was taken. The role of this sort of coalition continued until today. And I think the vision about working together and standing with each other is a concept that we have to value and continue to deliver. In the next slide, I think you are more familiar now that on every Wednesday evening, we will view the route for Thursday protest. And I'm very honored today to have one of my colleagues who has been part of this this distinguished work. And this was one of the preparation to make sure that the peaceful protests are safe. But obviously, This will not overcome the national intelligence services, the snipers, and all of the attacks that people in Sudan were bravely facing and, dying to make sure that, we get what we want, which is legitimate and what we were dreaming of. But following all of this preparation still, there was, a lot of accident during the revolution. And what I would like to mention in the next slide is about the efforts behind the scene. People realized that a lot of lives were lost just because we cannot deliver the adequate medical care. And so the training started about how to deliver first aid and what to do to stop bleeding and how to manage the airway. And the public were responding and were watching these videos and were practicing and applying these videos. Task groups were formed where there will be preparation for the rescue boxes by the donation from people inside Sudan and in the diaspora, Sudanese and non-Sudanese. But the community mobilization to be preparing yourself and your colleagues and knowing that you may die, but despite that, at 1 o'clock on Thursday, you go to the streets and you participate. For us in the diaspora was a lesson that we should work harder and harder, and an obligation that we must support the revolution. The security was a major issue because some of our colleagues who used their cars as ambulances to take injured to the hospitals were then chased and they were detained and were arrested. And in the next slide, I would like to remind those who are working outside Sudan that at the moment we are all trained about how to deal with mass accidents and major incidents. But in Sudan, they were doing this with very limited resources. And we all know about the problems and the limitation with pre-hospital care. And I think one of my colleagues is going to touch on this and talk about it. But following that, there were even hospital invasions by the National Intelligence Services and arresting those who were injured. And therefore, some of the injured were treated at home or away from hospitals. Health professional arrest and detention, and then the death and the assassination of Babikir and Mahjoub, who were protecting or looking after those who were injured. I would like to mention that the death of Babikir and the death of Mahjoub for all doctors was as well a turning point during the revolution. And this brought us together, all of us, more and more. We were more united to make sure that democratic change will happen. I have two of the x-rays here to show that we were trying to utilize and use all efforts to confirm that the injuries that were taking place were shoot to kill, because it showed bullets in the chest, in the neck, in the head, and they were not just accidental injury, as it was mentioned by the previous regime. So as I mentioned in the next slide, we were multitasking. We were, as I show in the next slide, about the multitasking work that was happening among the diaspora. I don't know whether the next slide or, thank you. Multitasking, so there was a work about saving lives on the spot or transferring them to the nearest safest hospital for recovery, and that should be done safely so they are not arrested. And then the rehabilitation at home with limited resources. And Wael is going to talk about that in more details. But during that, we were working on documentation and verification and reporting and advocacy in different platforms and media and unions and parliaments with different groups in the UK, in Ireland, in America, in Canada, all over the world. And I remember when we arrived in the UN Human Rights Council, we had an album. In this album, we had all the X-rays, obviously with no name and no date and no identification, but just with an index number. And this was very impressive. We had USB, like flash, with all of these X-rays and statements that were as well verified. And this have made a significant effect because we have used the knowledge and the skills of medicine to convey what's happening to the international community. I would like to mention another example in the next slide, which is about forensic medicine. And to all our colleagues who supported us, who are special, they're specialists in this area, I would like to thank them through this meeting today, where we were working closely with human rights organizations, and we're writing reports about medical malpractice in detention, about what happened during Al Khartoum massacre and during the revolution. Maintaining confidentiality, obviously, information governance, and data sharing protection. The impact of the forensic medicine work was as well very valuable and very important. And I would like in the next slide just to spend maybe a minute on Khartoum massacre and the campaign of Keep Eyes on Sudan. I think we all believe that the sit-in was the new Sudan that we were dreaming about, and the multi-faith, multi-ethnic, multi-colorful. We all loved the sit-in, and so the attacks and the killing of the barricade, soldiers, Hurras and Mataris, for us was a crime that we can never forgive. But the 3rd of June was like trying to take away from us our dream. We worked very closely with our colleague in Sudan to show the world that it was not only Khartoum that was attacked. There were 11 cities that were invaded. And we made this map, I remember, with the SPA. And this map was utilized very well in the parliament, especially in the UK. During that period, obviously, there was no internet. It's not just about the human right for having internet access, but there was effect on doctors being able to go to the hospitals because they were under threat from the RSF, nurses and female doctors and female nurses, but as well there was effect on getting medication and drugs because the internet was not working. So in approaching such devastating event, we have given the picture of what's happening on daily basis to the Sudanese people during June 2019. I would like to now then mention about the toxicology in the next slide, and the tear gases complications that we were all aware of. We remember when we talk about the tear gas, we remember Sa'idat al-Bomban, and we're grateful to God that Yani Rifqa, she was fine after she had thrown the tear gas back. But we are aware that there were quite a few injuries to the face, to the eyes, amputation of limbs, and death by suffocation. And discussing this with the toxicology expert about the tear gas, is it the way that it was used? Is it the type of the tear gas? Where was it from? What were the ingredients? What were the components of the tear gas? All of these factors, when I remember back how things were taken into a very professional way to handle all of these injuries, I think it was a useful lesson that we have to utilize our knowledge and our skill. I would like to highlight a very important aspect in the next slide, which is the psychological trauma. And we are a traumatized nation. For 30 years, we have been traumatized by different ways. But we were reaching the end. We felt like that's it, we are getting there. And to be dragged backwards after the Khartoum massacre, there was a lot of pain and remembrance and a lot of wounds reopened. We felt that our role is to provide psychological support through the program Silence in Blue and Doctors for Doctors, and work with our colleagues in Sudan, the psychiatrists and the psychologists from Al Ahfad University, and highlight the importance of this trauma, the psychological trauma, for all of those who witnessed or suffered from the different violations during that massacre. In the next slide, I just would like to highlight the website Doctors for Doctors, which was a program to support our colleagues who have witnessed the violation في عيادة المعلم during the massacre, and the program. And I hope that this will be reactivated again. As a pediatrician, obviously, I cannot skip talking about children and young people. And in the next slide, we managed to meet with the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health from the Sudan Doctors Union UK and from Sudan Junior Doctors Association in the UK to talk about the effect of the revolution on children and young people, because they were part of the revolution. They were affected by the regime, but they were participating in the revolution. And in my next slide, I think when I look at Dudu, who was 17 years old, who died for me, my family, and other families, and he was only 17, it brings tears to my eyes. And therefore, as well, the support of children and young people for their development, safeguarding, and psychological support is very important, and is something that we have to highlight. I would like to end by saying what is next and what is the future. And in my next slide, I would like to mention in the next slide about planning the future. We have not yet completed our dream, the civilian-led government. We're still on our pathway, and hopefully we will reach the ultimate goal that we hope. But during this journey, we have used our skills and knowledge, being the professionalism and the integrity, working in research and academic areas like with Sierra International. Now we have been investigated at witness during the revolution, the Sudan Doctors Union UK, with the London School of Hygiene, with the Goldsmiths University. We, as well, as I said, utilized all of the skills and knowledge working with forensic medicine and with our legal colleagues in about addressing all of these violations. But there are three areas that require more discussion and attention, because until recently, we still have accidents and fatalities and injuries in Sudan, unfortunately. One of them is the response to mass incidents, the trauma centers and pre-hospital care, and the rehabilitation. And I don't mean just the rehabilitation for those with brain and spinal injuries. I'm talking about psychological support as well. I would like to end my talk by reminding us all of what we have been fighting for, which is freedom, peace, and justice. And if we want to reflect today on the second anniversary about what we have achieved, about freedom to some degree, peace, the peace agreement have been signed still to be completed by engagement of other groups. But if we talk about justice, we have not achieved a lot, or we have not achieved anything, in my opinion, when we talk about legal justice and when we talk about social justice. And one of the main pillars of social justice is health. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for this inspirational talk. It was an excellent presentation. And thank you for giving a holistic overview of what the Sudanese diaspora were doing to support the uprising. I think you should definitely, as we discussed, think about writing this and documenting all of these historical achievements, maybe in a small booklet. And if you do so, I'll be the first one to buy this booklet. I mean, on behalf of the SDU UK, I would like to say that we're very proud of what you've done, you and the team who was in charge of the SDU UK at the time. So thank you again. We're going to do the question at the end. So I'm going to move to the second speaker. And our second next speaker is Dr. Maysoon Dahab. Maysoon comes from an extensive academic background. She's an assistant professor at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and also researcher at King's College London. Her areas of specialism are infectious epidemiology and conflict and health. She's done a lot of collaborative work with many reputable academic institutions and international organizations. And you may have all come across Maysoon's recent paper on the high mortality rates and infection rates on COVID-19, the paper that came out a few weeks ago and sparked a lot of discussion and debate on the matter. But what is relevant to us today is that Maysoon has also published a couple of papers or so during the revolution. One of them is a comment article in The Lancet, which was co-authored with Sarah Abdel Jalil from the SDU UK. But today she's going to talk to us about her other paper, which is on the estimation of casualties, detentions, and death during the civil demonstrations. This is a secondary data analysis that the SDU UK has also contributed to and supported this project. And in that project, Maysoon and her colleagues used the capture recapture statistical methods. And I have to admit, Maysoon, that I've got no idea what this method entails. So I'm very keen to hear from you about this interesting concept and the data, the whole data. Maysoon, welcome. And if you're ready, please share your slides and start.
Shukran, Ahmed. Just 1 second so I can share the slides. Okay. Thank you for the introduction and for the opportunity. As Ahmed said, today I'm going to speak to you about our efforts to estimate the number of deaths, injuries, and detentions that occurred during the early phase of the demonstrations in Sudan. I'm presenting today on behalf of my colleagues who co-authored the paper, but I'm also presenting on behalf of everyone who contributed to this effort from the SDU and the other civil society organizations that collected the data. And lastly, I would just like to نترحم على أرواح الشهداء. It's been very difficult actually for me today to put this presentation together. It really brought me back to a time where we were spending days counting name by name the numbers, but also what happened to every single individual who we had reports of deaths and injury. And it's been quite triggering actually. And I would like to say that if the information that I share today, is very difficult in any way to access the services that Sarah has mentioned, because this has and continues to be a difficult memory for us and for all those who we for the families who have lost loved ones, obviously. Ahmed, I'm going to try to take 10 minutes, so if I'm going over, please do let me know. So what we tried to do when the different reports of deaths were being reported was to try to get a better estimate of the deaths that were occurring. There were obviously, at the time that we completed our analysis, only 29 people were reported to have died according to the former regime. UN agencies and international NGOs were reporting twice as high that number. And we felt not only as an academic exercise, but an exercise in action for the immediate action, for moving people forward and supporting the SDU and other organizations that were working so hard to make plain what was happening in Sudan at the time, that we would need better estimations. And we hoped very much that this paper would be part of the future justice to be brought for those who have lost their lives and suffered as a result. So what we did was a study that collected data to try to do three things, really. One, we tried to estimate the number of civilians killed. We tried to characterize the type of violence that they faced. And we also tried to tabulate the data. It was limited, but still on injuries and detentions. We used three lists. These are the lists that were available publicly at the time that we could get a hold of. And this was not an easy task. And I can tell you more later about where our efforts stopped because we could no longer get that data for various reasons. But the data were one from the independent movement that maintained the data of people's names and who have died and were in who have died. The Sudan Doctors Union, obviously, which maintained an updated list of names, and also there was an anonymous Google site that called Lest We Forget, لكينا ننسى. And they also maintained a list. So what we tried to do was take these different lists to understand how many people were underreported and were not picked up in any of the lists. And so what we did was we took the different lists and we manually cleaned them and removed duplicates. And this is what I was saying was so difficult because we would sit with these lists name by name, town by town, country by country. And even before we did all the analysis, it was so apparent what was happening. And it's sad to remember now, and it was incredibly sad then. We tried to match the different names on different lists based not on just on the name, but the gender, obviously, the date, and the place and cost of deaths, if those were available to us. We did exclude deaths of army or security personnel from the analysis, and we also excluded 2 unidentified dissidents that just didn't have enough data for us to figure out who they were. So for the period up to the end of February, we used 3 lists, and after that, we had to use only 1 list. We used a methodology called capture-recapture analysis, and I'm going to speak very briefly about that, but basically, it's you're trying to fit statistical models to the observed overlap in lists. And I can talk more about that later for those of you who want sort of more detail. But for now, I will just say that we try to take the different lists and we compare them with each other. And the idea is that we don't only pick up what is on the different lists, but we try to model how many people may have died, would have died, but not have been picked up in any of the lists. So the number we provide is, we believe, a closer estimate to how many people have died in the period that we had the data for. So in the end, we had data for up to April 9th. And obviously this excludes the huge incidents beyond that from June forward. But in that time, we estimate that about 117 people were killed between up to April 9th. And of those people, of the 104 people who we found in at least 1 list, the majority were male, and about a quarter were under 18 years of old, so technically children. So about a quarter of them were children, actually. So when we looked at cause of death, this again is a difficult slide to go through, and I will just let it speak for itself as the audience looks at this to understand what the pattern may have been. But when you look at the majority of deaths being caused by gunshot wounds that were either to the chest or the abdomen or the neck, or through using of explosive devices or torture or tear gas, you realize that there's a pattern of qasd. This was meant to be this way. This was deliberate and planned. And so this is quite important for us to understand that the way people have died showed the intent of the killer. Again, we had injury from the Sudan Doctors Union. We had detailed injury data, especially from Al Gadarif, where the city that had the most killings after Khartoum. Khartoum had about 53% of the killings, and Al Gadarif just in one day had a large number of people killed on the 20th of December, if you all will remember. And of the 24 people who we had very, very detailed injury details for from hospitals in Gadarif, again, all but one were shot. They were all shot. When we looked at detentions, ديل الناس اللي كانوا في السجون, we found on the lists that we have 934 people were detained up to 8th of April. And as you can see from the list, most were activists, which likely meant youths who were involved in the movement from their localities, and the rest were professionals. And you can see that there was a variety of politicians and students and lawyers, and of course, medical professionals. I'm just going to conclude. For us, there was very clear, this was a rapid and patchy analysis. You know, we had the data that we had for as long as we did, and actually the data just cut off at that point. You know, when everything was turned off, when the internet was turned off, or when the massacre occurred, all the sources of the data that we had literally melted away because we couldn't communicate with people. We couldn't get these lists out. But for the time that we did, and for the analysis that we have done, it shows that there is very, very concrete evidence of a countrywide killing spree, really, mostly by firearm, by government-directed security forces. There were other causes of mortality, of course, notably torture, and that most detainees were professionals. This included doctors. We didn't have data on what happened to the detainees, but we have had other reported reports of systematic torture and abuse at detention facilities. These patterns of killings and detention and torture, unfortunately, are very similar to previous incidents of popular protests, especially in 2013 in Sudan and elsewhere, whether that's be Egypt or Nicaragua, where government forces meted out a deliberate and deadly response to popular uprisings. So I just wanted to share with you that this highlighted not only what happened during the revolution, but the critical value of what organizations like the SDU do by collecting data on mortality in real time in crisis. It matters a lot in a country like Sudan, where data on mortality is lacking, and especially in a situation of crisis. And I urge you to continue to bear witness to what happens in a country where the lights are not bright to pick up all that is happening. In the future, we feel like having this different civil lists of dissidents, they're very important, but on their own, they may show very different things. So it's very important to have this type of analysis where you combine them and you conduct statistical analysis to come up with a more credible total. And if I could just pass on one lesson learned for civil society, and that is hopefully you who are watching or those who have been involved in this movement since its beginning, is that your work is really vital, not only in treating patients and responding to the immediate needs of individuals, but also to, as I said, bearing witness and documenting. And so it's really three things for me. It's M, D, and M. It's maintain your community networks, which have allowed you to collect this data and to shed light on it. Document deaths and injuries, la qaddar Allah, if they occur. and make it public and in real time. Once it is public, academics like us are able to pick it up and to do what we need to do in order to move it forward. That saves time and it allows us to give back this analysis in real time as we were able to do with this work. I thank you for your time. This has been an incredibly sad project for me to be involved with. I wish never again to be involved with something like this again, but I am heartened that we have documented this for history, and I hope that history would bring justice to all those who have suffered. And I thank you very much, and I feel free to get in touch should you want any clarifications. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maysoon, for this elegant presentation, and thank you for doing all of this hard work and publishing it. And I think this should be an encouragement and motivation to all of us to start officially publishing and sharing data about this revolution in the literature. Can I just remind people that if you've got any questions, please leave them in the comment section, as we will try to answer all the questions at the end. We're going to move to a crucial part of our webinar, as we're going to hear from the people who had the frontline experience, those who faced the intimidation, the threats, the brutality of the of the security forces of the previous regime, and they did that with courage, and they maintained all the kind of the care for the protesters whilst facing all of these violent acts. We were supposed to have Dr. Mohammed Yassin from the Central Committee of Sudan Doctors, but unfortunately, due to some family commitments and personal circumstances, he wasn't able to be with us today. But we are very pleased to have Dr. Khalid Al-Amin, who's also a member of the Central Committee for Sudan Doctors. He is a specialist registrar in general surgery at Ibn Sina Hospital, and Hussam Al-Amin was involved in the organization of the field work, and he has put a lot of effort preparing the presentation, and he's going to talk to us specifically about how the medical teams were formed and how they functioned and performed during the different rallies, and we'll present some of the data that they collected during the revolution. دكتور حسام الأمين، شكرا جزيلا على وجودك الليلة معنا. إذا أنت موجود معنا تفضل، وأنا حساعدك بالسلايدز.
السلام عليكم. أتمنى إنه تكونوا سامعيني، لأنه السودان فيه بعض الصعوبات بتتعلق بالشبكة وكده. سلام.
لا سامعينك.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khalid, and thank you, Sudanese Doctor UK branch. I'm very grateful to be here today. I would like to greet injured patient during revolution, and also as Sudanese doctors who are working in Corona. In this presentation, I will present the general outline during revolution. We can start, Ahmed. Sorry, I will use Arabic language in sometimes.
تفضل طوالي.
Okay, next slide. Firstly, I would present the historical background. Al-Bashir regime is one of the most dangerous regimes in the world, and this regime has committed a large number of crimes for safety, such as murders, rape, and formation of organized group outside the law, such as Rabata and so and so. The Sudanese made two revolutions in 164 and 185 for establishing a state of justice and citizenship, and also reading the history, we confirm that all Sudanese government from 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 سامعني يا جماعة؟
أيوة سامعينك. Not sure whether we lost connection. حسام, I think I can't hear you anymore. حسام ما قادر اسمعك. I think we might have, Hussam might have lost his connection. So I think we can just carry on. And when Hussam comes back, we will come back to his presentation. So I'm going to introduce the next speaker. And the next speaker is Dr. Ahmed Al-Tahir. Ahmed is a friend of mine, and I know Ahmed for a very long time since we're in medical school. We both served in the Khartoum Medical Student Association Executive Board back in 2004. He was the president of the association and was the public health and health education officer at the time. What people may not know is that Ahmed later became or was elected the president of the International Federation of Medical Student Associations. And that was an unprecedented and historical achievement at the time, as Ahmed was not just the only or the first medical student from Sudan, but also the first from North Africa and the Middle East, as far as I remember, to become the top official of the IFMSA. In the following year, he spent his term at the IFMSA offices in Geneva. He then worked in the public health sector in Sudan, and he is currently a senior registrar in accidents and emergency in Manchester. He's also undertaking his PhD in pre-hospital care. And Ahmed had the privilege of witnessing the very first few days of the sit-in and observed firsthand how the medical care at the sit-in camp was established and developed. And then he wrote a wonderful piece describing the organization of the field clinics at the sit-in area and how they were linked to the nearby hospitals. He also made good practical recommendations. So in the next 15 minutes, we will hear from Ahmed about this descriptive analysis. So Ahmed, if you welcome, and you can share your slides and start.
Thank you, first of all, for having me today. And thank you for the introduction. So as Ahmed mentioned, so my name is Ahmed Al-Tahir. I do work in emergency medicine in Manchester. And I think I thought a lot before accepting to join you today. I think it's very humbling for someone like me to be sitting in Manchester and try to offer your opinion on what you had the privilege to share for only a few days. And in no way this is, I would say, an evaluation. Is more of an observation, and an external eye is to try to describe what was happening at that time in a very unique, I think, days of our country's history. I also think it's a very good way of looking back at the emergency care system in Sudan and try to understand how we can learn and evolve from the sit-in as a milestone in our health system history. So I'll speak briefly about the background before moving on. I have to say, first of all, it's a very limited description. This was just a snapshot for the first 2 weeks of the sit-in, which has evolved remarkably afterwards. There's also very limited data available publicly for many reasons. And as you can understand, as been mentioned by my previous speakers, there were issues about sharing data and make them available and have sources for data at that time. And again, people don't plan for sit-ins. People don't plan for crises. They do happen. So I think when you try to speak about standards, there are very limited references to get to. And I think the best reference will be the status of the country health system before the crisis or before the sit-in has happened. So this was an assessment that was done by the WHO just a few months before the start of the revolution in the city. And as you can see, the country was in a bad shape. We had many attendances to emergency departments. We had great inequality between Khartoum and other states. We had very limited training in pre-hospital care. We had very few ambulances. So imagine having a revolution in the city on top of that, and how strained with the doctors and the pharmacists and the dentists and the nurses trying to help an already almost broken emergency care system in Sudan. So that's all been mentioned, and I think known to most of us, if not all of us. And I think I was privileged enough to be in Sudan for the first 2 weeks of April, joining the WHO for some work about emergency care, and lucky enough to visit and share my experience in the city. So when I talk about emergency care, just to get people within a specific framework, this came out probably about 2016, 2017 from the WHO, and it kind of limits emergency care to seeing care, transport and transfer, and the facility care. And if you try to apply it to the sitting, you're more or less speaking about the seeing care and transport, and the facility care was more done in hospitals surrounding the sitting area. So all in all, we had 9 field clinics in the city. 4 of them were in actual physical buildings. The rest were temporary or kind of ad hoc clinics in different areas of the sitting area, which I'm going to show you next in a map. And these clinics were formed by different stakeholders. However, they had some coordination later, which allowed for a good distribution of location and resources. And all clinics had very good security around them. So you're not allowed to get in unless they make sure actually either doctor or a patient need to seek medical advice. So this is the area of the city, roughly. People can remember. People are not familiar with Khartoum. This is an island. This is the airport, and this is about 200 meters. So you can imagine how big is the area to cover, both by clinics. Say again, sorry. Can you hear me well?
No, just carry on, Ahmed. Everything is fine.
Sorry. Okay, so yeah, so this is the map, and the red kind of shadow is where people were mostly staying for the sitting, with access points in each side, and then the clinics were essentially mostly around the center of the sitting. So these are the 9 clinics with the edge for the hospital, the Maalim Hospital, which was the nearest hospital to the sitting. Very, very sick people and injured people were taken from these field clinics to the hospitals, including Maalim. But the day-to-day care was mostly done in these field clinics. When it gets to finance, I think these clinics got very well very much supported by both people from inside and outside, and most of them had their own kind of channels for financial and in-kind support, but there was also some kind of sharing for resources and medications between them. But I have to say, even compared to a normal hospital in Sudan those days, and even nowadays, they were well funded and had, I think, a decent amount of medication. Not necessarily appropriate for field clinics, as they didn't have, I would say, life-saving medication, but they had all the necessary medication you can use for, I would say, a primary field clinic. This was a photo I took from Al Kahraba clinic, and as you can see, they had stocks and stocks of medication which they shared with other clinics. Presentations were very challenging. So doctors working there were treating patients starting from a simple common cold, sore throat, headaches, and within hours it can move to life ammunition and very serious injuries. But the volume were big anyway. So you can imagine people moving in and out through the sitting, and they all can actually come to find free care by volunteer medical staff and doctors willing to help you and provide treatment medication for free. The number of staff, again, were large numbers of volunteers, all willing to help. But there were challenges about training, because you get people who are willing to help, but not all of them are trained enough to be there or trained enough to manage injuries or provide emergency care. And there was also challenges about clinical protocols. But as Dr. Sarah mentioned earlier, it's all to do with actually the existing health system in Sudan and how much training and protocols they had for major incidents and pre-hospital care. This was one of the 5 clinics next to the Kaharba, not far from it. And again, you can see it's almost always people there, from simple dehydration to asthma-related presentations to trauma and injuries. Not necessarily from live ammunition, but even from falls or simple minor trauma that need to be treated there. And again, they had to improvise. I mean, it's easy for me to sit here and speak about what to be done, but you can see they used every possible trick in the book to get the IV fluids provided and an IV medication given. There was one of the physical buildings so far away in an Awn al-Insani building. And again, it was more spacious. They could provide better care there. They had more facilities. I think they had Al-Hilal Al-Ahmar at that time also joining them and try to provide support and transport. And this is the Muallim hospital entrance. When it was there, it was a peaceful night, but in other nights, they were quite busy with major injuries and dying people, sadly. When it comes to what Dr. Maiso mentioned earlier, so registration documentation, I have to say, even in a normal hospital in Sudan before the revolution, we're not very much documenting and registering people in emergency care, in emergency department. So it's hard to expect that from in a revolution in a setting. However, that did happen, and some of the clinics did provide registration and documentation of care. However, there was not much coordination between them and auditing for this data. So we can't tell how much or how many patients exactly did attend the clinics and how many of them ended up going to other hospitals, sadly. Access was an issue for some clinics. The peripheral clinics did manage to transport and transfer patients easily. However, the inner clinics did struggle because it was a very crowded place and ambulances couldn't get in, and there was issues around security. As again mentioned before, you couldn't utilize the public ambulances, and people had to improvise and try to move patients by carrying them or in their own cars if they could. So if you move into the surge and major incidents planning, as I said, it was a very challenging and a very changing environment, moving from peaceful days to a very kind of a critical crisis within hours. And I think this is hard for any team to manage, and you couldn't plan for it. It could happen at any time. And there was, after I left the city, there were many incidents where people were warned of the sitting will be kind of dismantled and people will be injured and killed, and they had to be ready for it, and it didn't happen, and then they had some minor injuries. So that was always changing from one situation to another, and doctors and nurses and medical staff had to adapt to that, which was quite hard. And when it came to evacuation, again, that was hard because most clinics for security control had one entrance, which made it hard for them to get people out of clinics quickly if needed. And sadly, that was proven the case on the 3rd of June as well. And safety was an issue in many ways. Safety was an issue for patients. Safety was an issue for the staff working. Safety was an issue for transport and transfer patients. There were issues about security, for forces trying to interfere and trying to get information and pretend to be doctors and medical staff in. There were issues about where to take these patients and how safe it is to use your own cars. And there was safety about the changing environment. At any time, people working there, we expecting the worst to happen. And if you move to the last component, which is after you handling the whole emergency care, you get to prevention and health promotion. Not only people managed emergency situations, they moved on to try to minimize the risk of outbreaks. At some point, you could have over 1 million people in that still limited location, with the whole risk of having an outbreak and health hazards. And with individual and multi-agency interventions, there were many educational sessions and posters trying to warn people, trying to keep the place clean, and they did that very well. And I think we succeeded at the end. As I don't remember any reports of major outbreaks or health hazards that happened during the sitting. So I think my take-home message is, if you were in the city, you probably got a better care than many hospitals in Sudan. However, we know you can only get to what your health system is in a normal day. So we need to improve our normal emergency care. Luckily, there's a big project happening now with the WHO, and they're trying to strengthen the emergency care system in Sudan. So, and I think we need to support that both financially and technically if we can. And I have to say, the private sector was, in my opinion, very supportive in a surprise way. I've seen patients taken to Al-Muallim, I've seen patients taken to private care, and they got excellent care, and they got free care at that time. I know people were promising these hospitals that money will be provided, but the private sector did this step up, forward and provided support. And I think we have to keep that in mind when we're talking about training and capacity building, and try to review the role of private sector in the health system as a whole. And community first responders, that was mentioned by Dr. Sarah earlier, but I think it's very important that these young people who are keen to help and support get the right training. And again, there are big projects and a big curriculum available around, which we can use in Sudan to try to expand the base of community first responders. And hopefully we won't need them, but I think it's always, I think, a good bank of responders to have and to use in the future if needed. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ahmed, for giving this scientific account on what was going on at the sit-in in terms of medical care. It's a very good project, and I can tell you that the SDU UK supports this work, and we will offer all the assistance for this project to be published in the academic literature. I think Dr. Hussam Al-Amin is still trying to log in again. So we're going to move to Dr. Wael Ahmed. I had the pleasure and honor of working with Wael in the previous executive committee of the Sudan Doctors Union UK. He was the membership officer. And just to say a few words about Wael, Wael is a well-organized, dedicated, enthusiastic, and meticulous individual. Whatever work he produces, it usually comes with high standards. Wael is a consultant in spinal cord injuries at Stoke Mandeville Hospital. He proposed and initiated the SDU project on introducing the December Revolution Rehabilitation Center for both traumatic brain and spinal cord injuries. So he's going to tell us about this idea, what steps have been achieved so far, and what the future plans are for this project. Wael was also heavily involved in providing remote consultations to the protesters who sadly had spinal cord and brain injuries. So he's going to touch on this experience in his presentation. He's also got some videos from the victims sharing their experiences and statements. Wael, you can share your slides and start, please. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ahmed, for the nice introduction. Like Ahmed said, my name is Wael Abdul Karim Muhammad Ahmed, and I'd like to pay tribute first in Arabic. نترحم على أرواح الشهداء لسورة ديسمبر المجيدة ونتمنى عاجل الشفاء للجرحى والعودة للمفقودين. I'm just going to start sharing my slides. So today I'm going to talk to you about the December Revolution Center for Rehabilitation of Traumatic Spinal Cord Injury and Traumatic Brain Injuries. This is a project which was adopted by the Sudanese Doctors Union and is still underway. Like everyone said before me, Ahmed, Maysoon, Sarah, there were hundreds of major trauma injuries or polytrauma injuries, including traumatic brain injuries, spinal cord injuries, multiple open fractures, traumatic amputations, ruptured eye globes, penetrating chest and abdominal injuries, as well as burns. The number of deaths is debatable, but mostly reported as over 260. And we know there was also violence during arrests, mostly reported more than 1,200. The next slide is, I'm sorry for the populated slide, but I'm just going to try to explain. My source of data is mainly حاضرين initiative أو مجموعة حاضرين المتطوعين لرعاية الجرحى أثناء الثورة. The number of traumatic spinal cord injured patients, as you can see in the slide, there were 10. The mean age was 24 years. They were all males. They were mostly gunshot, 80%. Most of the injuries were in the thoracic spine, and mostly were paraplegics. In terms of the severity of spinal cord injury, they were mostly complete spinal cord injuries, which means that the sensation and motor function below the level of injury is lost. In terms of the specialist rehabilitation, as Sarah alluded before, there was some support in Sudan, especially for those who sort of have long-term prolonged disorders of consciousness in terms of nursing care. However, we know that we have very limited resources and we have no rehabilitation centers in Sudan at all, let alone neurological rehabilitation, and that's why we're making this project at the moment. So through connections, I started contacting colleagues worldwide, and I contacted a rehabilitation center, which is renowned in the CMCH Vellore, which is in South India. And we sent like 6 spinal cord injured patients who had mostly around 3 to 4 months period of rehabilitation, and they're back to Sudan. Unfortunately, 2 of those injured did not receive rehabilitation. One of them was actually very malnourished when we discovered about his injury. He was injured in the sit-in in the massacre, and he was taken to the security hospital, and he had treatment there, and then later on he was discharged home. So when we came to know about him, he was very malnourished. He needed lots of nutritional support, very weak, and now he's running into complications. And actually, because of the COVID, we were not able to send any further injured victims. In terms of the deaths, 8 of them are alive at the moment. There's 2 deaths from, I'm talking about the deaths after the injury, not at the time of the injury. Unfortunately, we lost one patient who was injured in Al-Lubaid in 29th of July, which is the massacre in Al-Lubaid. And he was in a private hospital for a couple of months, and after he was discharged, sadly, he passed away 1 week later. There was another death, and this was a high spinal cord injured patient. He was injured in 25th of December 2018, and subsequently 2 weeks later, he died. Unfortunately, in between, he deteriorated in terms of consciousness, and he ended up with a possible hypoxic brain injury. It was not clear whether he actually had a traumatic brain injury. Eventually, he died. Now, in terms of the traumatic brain injuries, there is reportedly 19 in total. The available records to me are around 6. The rest of the data we're still going through. These are possibly patients who were mildly injured. They didn't feature as severe traumatic brain injuries. So the 6 that we have, the mean age is 29. They were all males. 4 were gunshot and 2 tear gas explosion. In terms of outcomes, there is 2 of them minimal consciousness state, and 1 of them is a permanent vegetative state. 2 recovered their consciousness and walking ability. In a sense, they are able to do functional walking. And there is 1 death, and that's the patient who has both traumatic brain injury and spinal cord injury. So it's reported in both columns. In terms of specialist rehabilitation, only 2 of these received specialist rehabilitation in Cairo. And I visited them both in Cairo. It was in a center called Merkaz al-Dahil in Medina Nasr. However, the other 4 did not receive, mostly because they had sort of severe damage and they were only receiving care. In the next slide, I'm going to show videos for a couple of heroes from the spinal cord injury heroes. And I must say that I obtained consent to show their photos and videos. So the first one is a 23-year-old male. He was gunshot in Al Gadarif, 19th of December. He had a mild traumatic brain injury. He's a C7 complete tetraplegic. He had a right clavicle fracture, so the wound or the bullet went through his right shoulder, through the clavicle into the spine and went the other way. He also was bedridden after the injury. He ended up with pressure sores. As you could see, he had a sacral pressure sore as well as a trochanteric pressure sore. We transferred him to CMCH Vellore in India on the 4th of June, ironically the day after the massacre, and he was discharged back to Sudan on 1st of October 2019. Ahmed, if you could please share the video.
Okay, just bear with me for a second.
معهم الدكتور عثمان عيسى من القذائف المصابين ثورة ديسمبر المجيدة. الإصابة كانت 2018 شهر 12 يوم 19 في القذائف. الحمد لله رب العالمين هسه كويسة. الحالة مستقرة تماما ما فيها وجه. بعد العلاج في السودان أخذنا رحلة إلى الهند، وحتى في الهند العلاج كان كويس شديد يعني ما هي المشكلة. والله مشينا تعبانين لكن جينا والله كويسين شديد في أحسن حال. ما حتى العلاج هناك كويس شديد، علاج طبيعي ما عنده مشكلة. وأكثر حاجة بيهتم لها أنزل إنه العلاج يكون طبيعي لا بكحات ولا بحاجات دي. وهسه احنا الفكرة اللي سمعنا عنها دي والله كويس شديد يعني لو بقت هنا في السودان بتسهل للناس كثير. أحسن من الناس تسافر برا وتكلفة كثيرة هنا. الفكرة بتاعت العلاج والمركز التعييني للعلاج الطبيعي هنا في السودان والله كويس شديد. والحمد لله والله احنا مشينا تعبانين جينا كويسين جدا. هسه والله ما عندنا بالنسبة للحالات الأولى. هسه والله هي بس تعسير بسيط في الحركة إن شاء الله والزمن حاجة إن شاء الله. أدرى الحالة ماشية أحسن الحمد لله رب العالمين. الفكرة دي كويس جديد يعني شكرا الله.
Okay. Ahmed, if you stop sharing.
Okay, do you want to go back to your slides, yeah?
Yeah. So our next hero is again a 22-year-old male. He was gunshot in the Khartoum massacre, 29th of Ramadan. He's a T4 complete paraplegic. He was bedridden. He has pressure sores, as you could see. It was a necrotic sacral pressure sore, and he's got a left trochanteric pressure sore. He was transferred to CMCH Vellore in South India on 22nd of October 2019 and was discharged back to Sudan 14th of January 2020. Ahmed, if you could share, please, the video. Ahmed? Ahmed?
I'm on the case.
Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah?
Yes, I can hear you.
صالح حسين 23
صعبة كانت فيها تعبت أو يلا حادث.
لا لا صعبة لو فضل الاعتصام ضربت بالطريقة الشرف ورا بيجي وطلعت من قدام كنت عملت عملية بتاعت تثبيت بالمسامير وبعديها بشهر ولا شهرين مشيت الآن بعد التأهيل فهنا كنت ما بقدر بقعد ما بقدر أعمل أي حاجة بس زول راقد في البلد بحرك يمين لشمال وداري قال يقول لك عندي 3 4 أنفار إذا مشيت هناك ولا على التأهيل حاجات كثيرة بقيت بعملها برا قوم من الكرسي كويس السعيد برايا ورجع الكرسي برايا ولا تمارين توازن تمارين بتاعت الوقوف حتى حاجات كده أنا لا بتاعت الوقوف أي حاجة هنا.
طيب من بديت أول أيام لما وصلت هناك الحاجة اللي بدوا لك باش شنو؟
والله أول أيام كانت عندي ورقة ما بدأ لي البعد بدأ لي تمارين بتاعت التنمية مراكز أرفع حديد في تمارين ضم أصابع يقول عندي موضوع على قولك يقول لي التمارين بتاعت الصلاة يقول لي التمارين بتاعت البعد وبعديها في التمارين بتاعت الكرسي يعني استخدم الكرسي ذاته يعني لو مثلا.
Okay, thank you, Ahmed. I'm gonna carry on. Sorry. So the cost of rehabilitation for these heroes in CMCH Vellore in South India, including the flights, the transport inside India, was around $20,000 to $25,000 per person. But we also need to remember that once you have a spinal cord injury and a traumatic brain injury, unfortunately, you have these injuries for life. So all these injured heroes and victims, they require lifelong ongoing medical care, ongoing rehabilitation care, as well as equipment such as the cushions, such as the wheelchairs, and medical supplies such as catheters. Therefore, it is really cost effective to build a neurological rehabilitation center in Sudan. This table here shows the cost for spinal cord injured patients in the USA. For high tetraplegics, for the first year only, it's over $1 million. For those who are paraplegics, it's $500,000. And then each subsequent year, again, it's a lump sum of money. So it's really cost effective. So the next slide, Ahmed, if you can share this video, please, to give an example of what is a specialist neurological rehabilitation unit. I'm using the example of Greater Manchester Neurorehabilitation Services, and I pay tribute to my colleague, Dr. Raif Dahab, who is one of our rehabilitation medicine consultants in Greater Manchester.
Specialists in rehabilitation medicine not only treat and medically manage the complex patients with specialist knowledge, but also provide information, support, and counseling for the individual, family, friends, and carers. This helps them to understand the implications of the condition and maximize their functional abilities. We have a leadership role when it comes to managing the individual's care and improving the provision of neurorehabilitation services. We also have a teaching role to our team members and medical students.
We are responsible for reviewing and confirming the diagnosis and providing information around prognosis and recovery, medical and pharmacological management, management of sequelae including complex pain and epilepsy, overseeing care and liaising with other medical and surgical specialties if required, ensuring the safe discharge of patients and communicating with the GP for ongoing care.
Clinical neuropsychologists work with individuals, family, friends and carers to help them to adapt to or overcome their difficulties and better manage stressful situations. We help the individual's condition to be well understood and acknowledge changes that have occurred. Difficulties may be cognitive, including problems with memory or problem solving, emotional, including low mood or increased irritability, behavioural, including aggressive or impulsive behaviour out of character for the person. We may ask people to undertake tests to identify and understand their cognitive strengths and difficulties. We help the individual work towards their goals by providing education, psychological therapy, cognitive rehabilitation, or family support. We aim to improve quality of life for individuals by supporting them to regain their independence, return to work, and maintain positive relationships.
Ward managers manage the day-to-day running of the neurorehabilitation units, ensuring complex needs of patients are met. Staff nurses are involved in the direct patient care, including giving medications, taking neuro observations, meeting nutritional and bladder and bowel requirements. We communicate with patients and their families to offer support and guidance and work closely with support workers to meet the patient's personal hygiene needs. Specialist nurses have advanced skills in airway management and alternative feeding regimes. In the community, we help individuals to understand their neurological conditions, provide advice on medications, and monitor for health changes.
A speech and language therapist will see you in the neurorehabilitation setting if you are having difficulties with your swallowing or your communication. We may also be involved with working with the multidisciplinary team around the management and weaning of a tracheostomy.
Speech and language therapists provide individualised, in-depth assessments to look at communication, which may include speech production, language difficulties, and social communication problems. These difficulties may occur separately or alongside one another. Following this assessment, we may then provide direct one-to-one therapy, working with families and carers, therapy within groups, providing education. To help with communication, we may need to consider high-tech devices, for example, iPads or eye gaze systems. There are also lower-tech alphabet charts to facilitate communication. We also help with communication around more formal decisions, such as mental capacity assessments.
When working with swallowing difficulties, we may advise on optimal positioning.
Thank you, Ahmed. I'm just going to carry on with the presentation. Right, so the December Revolution Center for Rehabilitation of Traumatic Spinal Cord and Brain Injuries is planned to be a free, lifelong medical and multidisciplinary rehabilitation care for the December Revolution victims. And we are also going to manage all spinal cord injury patients and traumatic brain injury patients. It's just the free, lifelong medical and multidisciplinary rehabilitation care is planned for the injured victims, as the main source of funding is coming through fundraising from the Manchester Committee, which is aimed for supporting the revolution victims. However, the center will also support the development of the neurological rehabilitation specialty in Sudan. It will also provide a platform for training postgraduate and undergraduate doctors in rehabilitation medicine, as well as the training of postgraduate and undergraduate allied health professionals, including nurses, therapists, dietitians, and psychologists. So the proposal was first written in October 2019. I'm very grateful for the SDU UK to adopt the proposal from day one. The executive committee commissioned the funding of the project by 173,000 in January 2020. After that, we consulted the Federal Ministry of Health, and they allocated the Director of Curative Medicine to follow the project with us. And after that, we opened the application for hospitals to host the project. And the executive committee consulted a rehabilitation medicine advisory committee, who are my colleagues that I work with. We are 4 consultants from UK, 1 consultant from Australia, 1 from Saudi Arabia, and 2 consultants from Sudan. We had the first meeting as a specialist group on 18th of January 2019, and 2 of our senior colleagues were delegated to carry on the visits in the host centers in Sudan, as well as continue the process and carry on the options appraisal. And eventually, we had a meeting to finalize the recommendation of Sobe University Hospital to host the project. And this was submitted to the executive committee, who approved the recommendation. And we were sent an email confirmation by the Federal Ministry of Health by mid-June to approve the project. After that, the advisory committee had a meeting with the engineer, and we were talking about the design of the buildings for a specialist rehabilitation center. That was in July. Eventually, we developed a steering committee for the project, and that was end of July. The steering committee, I'm going to talk about it in details in the next slide. But in terms of the timeline, we have received a concept design and cost estimate submitted by New Tech Consulting Group to the steering committee in mid-September. So these are the groups forming the steering committee. We've got the SDU UK represented by the President and General Secretary, Sobe University Hospital represented by the General Manager, Dr. Shaddad. We also have the specialty groups, the Rehabilitation Medicine Advisory Committee, as well as the Sudan or Sudanese Physical and Rehabilitation Medicine Association. We also have the government ministries, the Federal Ministry of Health, represented by the Director of Curative Medicine, and the Federal Ministry of Social Development and Care. And we also have an IFADI charity group who are very interested in the project. In terms of the update, the steering committee had 3 meetings up until now. There's actually another meeting happening in a couple of days to push forward the project. There is an engineering committee which was established to communicate with New Tech regarding the proposal and finalizing the design and agree the costs. In terms of the finance, there is a committee established to gather charity funds, headed by an IFADI charity group. There is also a memorandum of understanding which has been exchanged between the SDU UK and Sobe University Hospital. It has not yet been finalized, but we are in the process to agree how to spend the funding by the SDU UK with Sobe University Hospital, which is mainly for the equipment. We just need to have a legal document. In terms of the specialty groups, meetings are ongoing. We had a meeting as a Rehabilitation Medicine Advisory Committee a few days ago. We're planning outpatient clinics for the injured victims, as well as workshops, conferences, and training, hopefully at the start of the new year. In early February and in March, there will be conferences and workshops underway. Just going to show a quick clip to explain the design of the center. It's a silent clip. So this is the parking area outside the center. And as you go in towards the main entrance, you can see this is the front and the main entrance of the December Revolution Rehabilitation Center. You can see some wheelchairs on the side. It's like a parking area for the wheelchairs. This is the main entrance and the reception. And then along This is a waiting area for patients. This is the reception. Along the corridor on the right side, there is rooms for outpatients clinic. On the left side, there is rooms for storing medicines and pharmacy. And towards the end, there is the physiotherapy gym on the right side, an occupational therapy gym. This is the reception of the ward. There is patient rooms on either side of the reception. And this is the other exit going into an open area. So I'm just going to share a nice memory that I had, and I'm very thankful to Hadreen, Nazim Siraj, to have the opportunity of meeting one of our heroes, Colonel Hamid, who defended the injured at the crackdown in the first week of April 2019. I must pay tributes to the Sudan Doctors Union, UK branch, for adopting this project and giving me the opportunity to fulfill one of the dreams to improve the neurological rehabilitation services in Sudan. I would like also to pay tribute for the group, which is MDT for Injured Heroes. This is a group of mostly diaspora consultants, along with consultants in Sudan, that is up until now has been looking after the injured victims, as well as daily discussing the cases, as well as scans. So thank you. We also need to pay tribute for Hadreen Initiative, who provided this data and provided me the opportunity to help the injured victims. And lastly, but not least, my colleagues from the Rehabilitation Medicine Advisory Committee, Dr. Salwa, Mr. Rahid, Dr. Raif, Dr. Aladdin Al-Malik, Dr. Hanan, Dr. Ahmed Saad, Dr. Sati. Thank you very much for helping and still continuing to help with this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Wael, for this elegant presentation. It was good to hear the experiences of the victims in your presentation, but it was also sad to hear that some of the protesters and victims were left with such devastating outcomes, not for any reason other than them demanding peacefully freedom, peace, and justice. And on a positive note, we've got this rehabilitation center, and I really hope that the center sees the light very soon. Unfortunately, I think we couldn't get Hussam Al-Amin to log back in. He had a network issue which he was trying to sort out. So I think what we may have to do is get him to record his presentation, and then we'll publish it on a Facebook page at a later point. With that, we have reached the end of our presentations. I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Sarah Richard, who may have picked up some of the questions that were posted on the Facebook, or she might have some comments. So Sarah, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you so much for the interesting presentations. It's very, very comprehensive, and I appreciate it. Must have been such a tremendous workload. I just had a few questions in regard to training, especially training first responders in times of crisis. How well can we liaise with other allied health professionals? I know that doctors are well organized, Sudanese doctors are well organized, but how about nursing schools and therapists? How well can we support these groups from our end? Is there any ideas at all?
Can I answer this question?
Yes.
Right, so the WHO now have a new course called the Basic Emergency Care course, and it's aimed at all kind of nurses, paramedics, health allied professions, and it addresses the basics of emergency care, trauma, sick people. So that would be a good course to start with for these people. But the community responders is even a step beyond that. It's for the lay people in the communities, especially like in small villages and in next to highways and motorways. and even Lajana al-Muqawama. So everyone who's young and interested in this kind of involvement with accidents, major, minor traumas, you can provide them with a kind of a startup, very basic list of actions to do. I know Hilal Ahmar had a lot of work in the past, but the WHO is also picking up and providing the BEC course, and hopefully in the future a community first responder course as well.
Okay, thank you. Also, Dr. Maisoon has touched upon, the deaths and the people that have been lost during the uprising. I was wondering about people who were under detention, who went through torture, people who probably have long-term physical and psychological disabilities. If you just can inform our audience to tell them what is, if there's any plans in place for these people in terms of long-term follow-up and rehabilitation. Are there any projects going on at the moment?
Is this question for Maisoon, is it?
Anybody from the panel, if they can, are happy to respond to this question.
I think my fellow panelists would be in a better position to answer.
I can answer part of the question, which is about the rehabilitation. Rehabilitation as a specialty is very wide, and in terms of all the injuries that were sustained during the revolution, you could have a specialty for every sort of category of trauma. In a sense, there is lots of psychological trauma, there is lots of post-traumatic stress disorders, and I think my colleague Sarah Abdel-Jalil already touched on the support and work that has been done with Al-Ahfad Psychology Group, which is an important aspect of rehabilitation. There is the part which we are trying to develop in Sudan, which is neurological rehabilitation. And the importance of this is to introduce for the first time inpatient rehabilitation facility. This is the core of rehabilitation medicine as a specialty. And then after that, you can add a lot of other subspecialties like amputee and prosthetics rehabilitation, like musculoskeletal rehabilitation, like trauma rehabilitation. Nowadays, trauma is managed worldwide in major trauma centers, where the main aim for a major trauma center is to maintain the life of people. And I think in Sudan, the way forward is to start with making and developing major trauma centers first and foremost. And this will add to what my colleague had to say, Ahmed Al-Tahir. This will actually link the process of management of trauma from the pre-hospital management into the phase of rehabilitation. So you need to have a whole of a structure in the middle. So in terms of rehabilitation, yes, definitely there is a room to do a lot of projects. And I think our project will be a start to sort of, follow other rehabilitation projects. I have lots of colleagues, like I said, in my committee who have lots of aspiration. We want to develop the idea further. We were only talking about 16 bedded rehabilitation unit in Soba. However, you need to start somewhere to actually develop the specialty, in addition to the idea of training all categories, all allied health professionals and doctors.
Okay.
If I may, Ahmed, just talk about the medical malpractice. I think Sarah was referring to the torture during detention, if I may, if I got it right. So there's already a report that has been written by members of the Sudan Doctors Union, UK branch, in collaboration with colleagues in Sudan. Part of this was published in one of Al-Hikmah journals, and there are other reports about what what sort of malpractices were done during detention. Regarding individuals, it depends on the individuals to try to take it further if they wish, and then they will be supported, obviously. But there are issues about the use of or the detention in cold cells, where there will be damage internally from staying for a long time in an area where it is freezing, for example, and as well not giving the medication for those who are hypertensive or diabetic, and delay their reviews in hospitals. So like slowly making them, get the complication and possibly even die. So there is some work that has been done. Further, more work can be established or accomplished if individuals are keen to take that further, because it is linked closely to ethical commitment by doctors, good medical practice, and it's an area that we should look at in Sudan as part of as well the legal justice. I hope that answered part of the question.
Thank you very much. Ahmed, do you have any questions at all? Or?
I don't think I've got a question. I just looked at the Facebook page. There's one comment just to mention to Ahmed Al-Tahir, Dr. Abdul Baqi Ahmed, who I think he participated in the work. He just wanted to mention that the your work on the medical care at the sitting camp was presented in an international conference. That's one comment. I'm pretty sure that we will continue to receive questions, and we will pass them on to the speakers. And I think we can conclude now. Thank you all. Thank you all the speakers. These were excellent presentations. There were lessons learned and lots of recommendations. And maybe with my colleague, Sarah, we can draft a single document incorporating all of these excellent recommendation points. We'll get in touch with the speakers. We're very grateful for your presence today, and thanks to all the audience who were watching us and following us on the Facebook page. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Assalam.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.